Please welcome warmly Anthony Batt. Hey, Anthony.
I think I'll just use this one.
There you go.
Hey, so thanks for having me. Yes, I'm a serial entrepreneur, and I've done exactly what those folks just did, stand up and pitch my company. And I'll tell you, it's really nerve-wracking, and it takes a lot of courage to do that. So I was really excited to listen to them. So that said, I'm just going to kind of jump in and tell you a little about my background and then kind of tell you what I'm working on now. I'm not going to dwell on what my company does. I'm just going to tell you my experiences, how I've been working in VR. So you guys, if you want, I'm on Twitter. I'm active there. I'm DJ Batt. You can follow me, or we can chat afterwards via Twitter. So my background is I started off as a designer, and I was like one of those I didn't even know what entrepreneurism was. Like, I just knew that I was not good in college and I was dropping out, and I kind of loved working with computers, and I loved sort of being creative. And luckily I sort of stumbled into the internet right at the right time where those kind of skills actually were valuable. And so I really sort of taught myself the internet and became an engineer. And as a result of becoming an engineer, it gave me a lot of opportunity to get jobs that I probably wasn't really qualified for, but I actually scaled, and eventually was able to start my first company called Green Plum. That was like venture backed, and it didn't really use any of my designer skills. It used a lot of technical skills, and it really got to become like a database company. And I decided to part ways, and which then got me to another startup in San Francisco called Ironport Systems, which was all about email and security, and it still wasn't creative enough for me. So I actually left that startup, which actually was very successful, met a lot of great people there. But and then I finally started BuzzNet, which was really too early. It was like Instagram in 2004. So you actually had to buy the phone and then buy a camera and stick the camera onto the phone and then take the photo. And we discovered that, like, if you actually had those two things, you were uploading your photo to like a really awful telecommunications provider, and your photo looked like crap. So we said, oh, we should fix that. And we were just so early that we kind of missed the entire market. And so we did many, many pivots to figure out what our business was. And we focused on what we called social media, not social networking. And I ran that from 2004, raised $80 million, had 250 employees. We're seeing about 230 to 300 million uniques per month. And we're making money. And around 2010, I decided to move on. And I bumped into a friend named Ashton Kutcher, and he had a really interesting business in social media and film and television, traditional media, and he was just starting to invest. And so I became the president or the head of digital and worked with Ashton for 3 years, which was really exciting, met a lot of really great entrepreneurs, and you just had a fabulous time doing social media and just really learning from a very, very creative guy. He's extraordinarily creative, very inspiring. He works easily a 12-hour day every day. I had agreed to do about 2 years, but I also told him up front that I was going to start my own company. Which brings me to where I'm today. My old co-founders from Green Plum are now my new co-founders in WeVR. And so, I think that when you have a good team, you tend to want to stay together and continue to work together. So we sort of got the band back together, and we were kind of not doing VR at the time. We actually we were lost. Like, we weren't going to make it as this company. But then what happened was we stumbled into VR and we sort of pivoted. And so we decided to make VR, and we decided to become a platform to distribute VR, knowing that we're probably 5 years early. But since markets are moving so fast nowadays, we think being slightly early is going to work in our favor, because we raised enough money to kind of give us the opportunity to actually make stuff, and when the market matures, we think we'll be there right on time. I don't know if anyone's following the VR market. It's moving very, very fast. It's actually moving so fast that, like, every time I open up my news feed, there's like something like groundbreaking happening. So when you're in that kind of market, it requires you to like raise more money and do things that I think that are sort of unholy for startups, which is like try to scale or keep up with the market faster than you can as a young company. So we're moving through it at a pace that we think is logical, but again, we have a lot of outside factors that are forcing us to grow fast. So not to bore you guys, but I figured just like a little bit of like history on VR. There was a computer scientist that actually in the 60s was like actually, doing really interesting work. He was actually coming up with these VR headsets in 1960s. So it's like, VR is not new, it's actually old. It's sort of like the internet. Like when I got to the internet in 94, the internet was already functioning. Your computer didn't have a TCP/IP stack, but there was TCP/IP networking, and it just became sort of popularized. So VR is actually started in the 60s, and then in the 90s we had Jaron Lanier and VPL, and we had a movie talking about VR, and it was just like the compute systems were not fast enough. They just couldn't refresh the screen. They just weren't good. But the idea of like actually being immersed in the media is something that people are very interested in. I think that like when I was running BuzzNet, the thing that we saw time and time again is that we would see repeat visitors viewing content over and over and over again. And we called that a level of immersion. We called it engagement, but people were immersing themselves into a certain genre of music. And I actually took away from that when I was moving into VR that like I think people actually want to be more into the stuff they want to see. And I think VR actually kind of brings that to them. And there's a long conversation about VR versus AR. I actually think VR is less distracting than the potentiality of AR. AR is like if I'm standing here on the stage right now talking to you, I could also be, having a video playing. I just find that to be distracting. So I think actually VR actually makes sense to me because you're totally immersed. In 2012, Palmer Luckey like hits it out of the park. So he funds this Kickstarter campaign, which is like crazy, $2.5 million very, very quickly. You guys probably know this story. But then then he has subsequent follow-ons. And then, in March of 14, he sells it to Facebook for $2 billion. And he's on, gets the cover of Time magazine. But that's how fast things are moving in certain sectors. Other areas aren't moving as fast, but this sector moved fast. That is about as fast as I've ever seen it. He killed it. And what's driving a lot of that is that like the technology that was actually inside the VR systems that he was making was being driven by a lot of mobile technology innovation. Like the Valve platform that he actually was collaborating with, those green like solder boards are actually OLED displays, which are just put into a headset, which are then tethered back to a computer. So like the mobile compute systems like put so much money and resources into like making things small, fast, and powerful that now it can actually run a VR headset. And so the Valve headset, or the Vive headset, which HTC makes, now is sort of in market. That's the one on the left. And then on the one on the right is actually the Samsung Gear, which you guys have seen, which is like the actual phone stuck in the plastic headset. And it actually gives a pretty good experience. And this is just first generation. This has just happened over the last couple of years. So if you kind of think, when we saw the phone, if you go back and look at the slides, our phones were these flip phones. They were ugly. They weren't designed. They had no really good human interfaces on them. They weren't designed to be cool. They were just designed to function. Well, I think that the headsets will actually continue to become lighter and less cumbersome and more easy to use. I don't think you're going to be wearing them in public and walking around with them. I think that's silly. But I think at home, if something's good enough, if the New York Times puts out something, or the Wall Street Journal, or some movie company puts something out, you'll actually go home and try this thing on, I think. Of course, Oculus has the Rift, which has a pair of headphones. And then I work with the Google Cardboard team, and what they're doing is really, really great. I actually thought when they first launched the Cardboard, it's like right after Facebook bought that thing for $2 billion, for Oculus for $2 billion, and then Facebook drops Cardboard, which I thought was sort of like a joke almost, but actually they're building a really interesting platform. And I think, if you're an executive at Google, you saw how social just spun right past you. It was like, they were like, yeah, we're not really interested in the social thing. And then Facebook's now this beast that's like beating them a lot in a lot of ways. I think that companies like that can't take on stuff like VR seriously. They have to get into it. Otherwise, they can end up, being out of a market. BlackBerry was the phone to have, and then 2007, the iPhone drops, and no one wants a BlackBerry. So I think that VR, from the big guys, they're going to spend a lot of time and money on developing it. And I think that's good, because when you have a lot of hardware getting built, that means that we have to start becoming very creative. And you just don't want to have a lot of hardware that just has no content. And so I've spent from 2013 till literally yesterday or Saturday making VR content, like actually physically coding, shooting, scripting, editing, fighting to make VR. And that's where I've learned the most, and that's where I actually feel like I can speak with some confidence and volition about the medium, because I've actually made it, and I think it's pretty exciting. So when you're thinking about VR and making it, there's kind of two places to kind of think about. There's room scale, which is my colleague on the left. That's like you're hooked up to a computer, you got controllers. It's a really awesome experience. If you haven't tried it, I think it's a really cool thing to go try it. Before you judge VR, go try it. Then you have the mobile version, which is it's less immersive, but it's equally as immersive in a different way. And so we have this sort of thing that we use at work. We have this sort of like on the upper top part, we have the immersive quadrant, full presence. So you have room scale, which means you can walk around in a 20 by 20 foot volume. You can actually play, you can do control, and it's generally totally CG driven, meaning it's a 3D environment. And then on the bottom, the casual quadrant is where you have video, which is more of a lean back, you're viewing, and it's mobile. And I think the mobile VR space is gonna explode in ways that I can't even talk about because it's going so fast. I have some ideas, but I think I'm gonna be surprised, and that's the good thing. So the kind of why the VR, so the couch VR, is because a lot of people own the phone. They have to buy this thing for $90 or a cardboard for free. And we think like the way the brain records all this content, it feels like a memory or a dream. And so it's kind of interesting. And I think also as a society, we're slightly technically addicted, that we kind of want new technology all the time. And so I think mobile will move fast, and therefore you'll get a lot of people trying these headsets on and kicking back and watching VR. And moreover, I think that the creative inside everyone that wants to make this stuff, since it's a computing device, you can actually start watching where people are looking and start programming stories in a direction that's not necessarily completely scripted. So there's a lot of interesting algorithmic kind of content that you could produce based on the way the person's looking and feeling. So I think in other words, there's a lot of space here in the mobile side. There's massive space to grow creatively on the room scale side. But I'm gonna talk mostly right now just about the mobile side. I have the most experience there. So we have our own camera. We hacked together a bunch of GoPro cameras. So right now, there are no sort of professional tools for VR making. It's all hacking, which is great because when you're hacking stuff, you're learning. And so we've hacked this system together. It's 4 GoPros. It feels like you're maybe like a marble jar. It's not that big, so we can put it anywhere. Or we've done this whale simulation, which is on the HTC Vive. By the way, we launched this whale 2 weeks ago, and it sold 8,000 copies in a couple weeks. It's actually doing quite well. But it's a full whale simulation. You're standing on a boat, the whale swims by. It actually looks like it's 80 feet long, and you feel like you're like this little guy standing on a boat. It's actually pretty spectacular. And then we have this sort of hybrid, which is you've shot VR and then you made synthetic worlds. And so there's kind of like, that's the way I break it down. You're either shooting it, it's sampled, or it's a hybrid, or it's fully synthetic. So part of our business is actually partnering with creative people to actually make content. We think that like we're sharp at the technology and we can produce the content, but our companies and myself are always trying to figure out who do you partner with to find the best stories. So we worked with this guy named Reggie Watts, who's a friend who I think is like a musical genius. He's just super talented. If you've not followed Reggie Watts on TV or YouTube, I recommend him. He's very interesting. And then he has a partner named Ben Dickinson, who's a director. So we actually grabbed those 2 guys and said, we're going to make VR. And they're like, what does that mean? And what they did is they kind of gave us a script. It's a general, like, hey, here's what we're going to do. And it's totally not VR. You don't get it. So what we do is we completely break the script down, and we force this unholy experience on these creative people to actually think about what it's like to tell a story in a surrounding where you're totally surrounded. But we also tell them, listen, you don't, just because there's stuff behind you doesn't mean you have to do stuff behind you. Like that's sort of like the first thing, like, oh yeah, we'll make something happen behind you and we'll scare the bejesus out of somebody. It's just not cool, right? It's just like, no, it's, that's easy, and sure, it's probably fun, but if we're gonna do something brave, let's not just scare somebody. So let's figure it out. And so through a bunch of pre-visualization and you know, these filmmakers really don't like this part. It's just like they're kind of like Ben particularly is a script writer, so he's like, I don't get it. So we kind of put him this unholy event, and then what we do is we sort of test everything. Like, it's not good enough that we have the previs, but then we have like things that we test to make sure, because when you go out in the field, it could cost you, you know, on the low side $5,000, on the high side it could cost you $50,000 to shoot this stuff in a day. So what we do is we test, and we have in this case, this little video I just played is a robot where we have to like kind of retake shoots, so we don't want to have the camera move in a way that that we can't control precisely with a computer arm. So we actually tested that; it actually worked. But also, we're also in the field. So like my DP, I have him stuck on a train in New York shooting stuff, and then we have to like hack a monitor to actually see the cameras, because you have 4 GoPro cameras, and you know, the GoPro cameras are very flaky, so they're always breaking or always turning off for some unknown reason. So we're trying to make sure that when we're shooting, we actually know that we're shooting. So there's a lot of stuff in the production field that we've learned how to like optimize and work around. It's nothing short, but it's always exciting. And then here's another rig where we have 5 cameras set up, and we're really trying to capture these specific scenes. But this photo is really here to show you it's a total mess in the field. It's like, it's just, you know, like if you go shoot a regular video with a regular video camera, it's very modern. It's not simple, but it's modern. It's been thought through. VR is a mess. Like when you're shooting the camera, like no one knows what they're doing. Like in our team, we're very tight. We know exactly what we're doing, but we're hiring people that have never worked on VR shoots before. And so it's just kind of like a mess, but it's fun. But our camera, the reason why we like it so much is it's really small. So in this thing, this is a shot from Gone. We did a thing with the guys from Skybound Entertainment, and they're most famous for The Walking Dead. So if you've watched The Walking Dead, that's Skybound Entertainment. That's Kirkland. He did a 10-part series with us called Gone. It's on Samsung Gear, and it's a thriller. But like the director really wanted to get the camera right close to everything, and we loved it. So this camera goes right into the refrigerator with this actor who's playing dead, and you can't do that with a big motion camera. So we've become very efficient with our creatives to actually figure out how to capture the shot based on the need of the script. We're always in service of the creative. The technology is never sort of telling the creative they can't do something. And so light. So here we have Natalie Manuel. She's this co-star with Reggie in the piece that we made called Waves, and she's also in Game of Thrones. If you're a Game of Thrones fan, she's in it. And so this is a GoPro shot. What you're seeing is really just 4 GoPros on the beach, but GoPro's dynamic range is really nice for outdoors. It's nice for blues and sunlight. But on the upper left, all those rocks have people behind it. Like we're all like, okay, you know, action. And then there's like, you know, you'll see like 15 people running in every direction trying to find a hiding spot. You know, because if you see the sun is actually like, it's gonna go away, we're gonna miss this shot. So it's like, we're like on a hurry up, you know, and the furry thing right in front of you, we take out, but that's a microphone. So, you know, we can do compositing. I have you know, so we can like do stuff with green screen. I'm just gonna let you this video run for 1 second.
We should make ourselves more comfortable. Perfect.
You made it. Thank you. No. Sorry I'm late.
So it's a lot longer. That was a very rough cut. So you saw Reggie come out of a tree, and then you saw him sort of disappear. That was like a really rough cut. But that's just to kind of show you that we're playing with compositing, and we're playing with space. When you're looking at that, and when you're looking at this image, the far right and left are the things behind you. This is an ectorectangular lat long image. So you know, we have to edit that way, so we have to think about this. So it's pretty interesting. It's fun to kind of try to tell these stories. we can move the camera in the car. It works really, really great. This is Kenan Thompson. We shot in New York. This is where we actually just shot him directly with one camera, where we're actually talking to him because he felt more comfortable that way. And then what we do is we just move the camera on a nodal head so we can kind of capture all quadrants. He was super funny. Like, he had no idea what we were doing. We were just like, just keep talking. You know, he was just super fun. And then here on set, what we do is we quickly pull off data, we throw it into a headset, we look at it, we go, are we getting what we're supposed to be getting? Because everything looks completely different when you put it on your face. It's like what you'd see on the screen just like is an approximation. Here we're playing with, this is a trap DJ collective out of Silver Lake, California. We really wanted to capture this intimacy of a kind of a party that you would never get invited to because you're not a trap DJ. And so we tried to capture the scene, but here I'm just trying to illustrate we could do a lot of different edits. But this is what we call aspirational voyeurism, meaning I can put you in a party scene and you can just sit there for, this is a 40-minute piece. I've had people sit in it for 30 minutes and pull it off and have no idea how long they were in it. They'll say, I was in there 10 minutes, because time just completely compresses and tweaks out. So this is a really fun piece. For the designers, we have in our software, we have a fully interactive layer, so you can do triggering of audio, we can trigger videos, we can trigger all kinds of stuff. It's pretty powerful. It's a great place to start thinking about how you can become very creative. One more minute or wrap it up? Keep going. Someone says keep going. I'm going as fast. So here, I'm going to rock it here. So it's like, we think great virtuality is like a dream. It's like a memory. When you put it on, you're totally surrounded. You feel like you're either recalling a memory or having a dream. And so we find presence happens when you have that sort of dreamlike state. And so what we try to do is we try to like merge the audio, the full immersion of audio and visual, and this sort of a presence or this connection with the visitor in the simulation. And then eventually we try to find presence. If you find that presence, that moment that connects, I think we have a sort of a winning moment in VR. And we're always trying to find, like, as a person that's been in the field for a lot, we try to find those moments. Like, we actually try to script them, but we don't know if they always work. And this is the house party. This was just at Tribeca. This was Keith Stanfield in the backseat. You're kind of cruising this neighborhood with him that ends up in sort of this really weird, tragic event. This is one of my favorite hip-hop groups called Run the Jewels. We spent a lot of time with them building this really interesting experience. And then just recently at Tribeca, I produced this piece with a guy named Tyler Herb. And this is that full body motion. You're dancing inside this simulation that he created. And I couldn't say it any better than what The Verge says, which is like your brain just switches on something else. It's pretty cool. It's pretty profound. And just to kind of quickly end, I just want to give you guys like the market. This is not my data. This is like Goldman Sachs data, to the extent that we can trust Goldman Sachs here. They think, which is questionable, they just think it's going to be a big market. You know what I mean? And they have a base case scenario of being like 45 billion on the hardware side, 35 billion on the software side. That's their base case. Some think that's wildly crazy. Some think it's actually totally doable. Going forward, we need lots of brave, creative people, coders, designers that kind of come into the space and start working. We need less hype. We need time to mature the market. And you know, I think VR will become more social, and I think for people that aren't interested in any of that, I think that we all probably take photos of our friends and family. I think the cameras are going to become so small that you'll be able to record 360 moments that will actually live as artifacts that you can kind of step into in years to come or share with your family. So you'll actually be getting a higher fidelity experience. So I think that's going to happen. And I think that's where you'll see social and that kind of personal VR stuff really blow the market up. And that's it. Orange chair.
Orange chair. Thanks for doing that. That was great.
Thanks.
Hi, everybody. I'm David from Uncork Studios, and I'm here to ask probing questions of Anthony. And there's somebody in the audience with a microphone somewhere, right over there. So if you have questions, please raise your hand. We're just going to have a discussion, and let me know when time is going. WeVR is a weird company. It's, I think, we're here at Tech Fest, and you're both a tech company, but you're also very much a content company, or you have transport, which is the delivery transport, right?
Yep.
And so you've really taken a holistic view of both like the tech as sort of a piece of it, but not the piece of it. And
Yeah, I kind of think that like when you look at Netflix or like even if you look at what maybe Amazon Prime is, if you look at their overall head count, it's probably more engineers than like creative talent or development executives. And so that's the way we looked at it. We were like, listen, to make great VR, you have to probably really have a technical infrastructure, the know-how, and the playback systems in order to get you there. And then we then said, in order to do that, we're in service of the creative. So we have to actually always be working to make the creative's vision happen. And that's why we kind of have this like tech and creative makeup.
has that shifted over time? Like for you to get from wherever you started to telling Keenan Thompson to just keep talking?
I think the thing about it is like when you're raising money, you kind of have to almost tell white lies. You have to say like, we're going to build a huge technology platform, but you kind of know that you have to start. You can't say first we're going to make a lot of VR with creative people, and somehow we're going to find a technology product. You have to actually say you're going to do this. So we have every belief that we're going to make a technology platform, but we know that in the earliest days you actually have to make the stuff. And that message doesn't really resonate with the venture community. And so the pivoting that we've done is really spending a little more time and a little more energy and a little more money on making the VR than which actually really informs the product and the technology.
And has it started to shift? That's actually a question I had, was the relationship between capital and ideas and what people are funding, I guess,
Capital seems to have a very hard time funding pure creative content. I tend to argue with those fellas because I say, what's the difference between like a hit like Slack and a hit like Game of Thrones? You got lucky in both cases, but it wasn't dumb luck, it was educated luck. It was like they're experts.
Right.
Stewart did Flickr, he did this other thing. This Game of Thrones guys were great writers. So it's like they made bets. Technical investors don't tend to know how to bet on content. They know how to bet on like, this is a security service. We hope it's a hit.
Right.
You know what I mean? But it's so more and more venture investors are starting to think about how these hybrid models are coming. It's content and technology.
Yeah.
And I think that the market's warming up to that. And I think they're going to have to, because I think what's left at the end of the day is like, it's not technology for pure technology's sake. It's technology to either, inspire or make people's communications better or entertain them. And so they have to start looking at how those two connect.
Right. So I think everybody in the room probably works somewhere, has been asked something about VR recently, whether their boss is saying we need to get into VR.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, having all this experience that you talked about, how do we not fuck this up? How do we go forward in a smart way?
It's a really good question, and I like the way you expressed it.
I'm wrong. I'm pretty wrong.
The thing is like hyping something before it's mature is a bad thing, and that will mess it up. And I think that we just have to be a little patient and let both the creative and the technology kind of grow up a little bit. And then I think that we actually have to really hold creative people to a higher standard to actually make real content. They can't, we just don't want a bunch of demoware in there. So I think it's sort of like it could mess up. I think also, there's another place where you have Samsung, Facebook, and Google, and Sony are the only guys that really have like a really, they have the money and the power to invest in this. And if they start to get freaked out, they could just bail on it, and then you would have like the lack of hardware. So it's not all rainbows and pork chops right now. It's a little, it's a lot of people excited. And people just need to have hard work. The internet went through the same thing in '94, and going into the early 2000s, it was very hyped, until actually people saw how transformational it's going to be. So it's a good question. I don't have the perfect answer for it.
I don't think anybody does. How do we? When you were talking, I was thinking about the lighting rigs right? So on the beach shot, right? And thinking about where we are now with, film production with where it is. And I think your company skews, at least what I understand of it, skews in that direction, skews like you're a tech company, but you're working on film production.
Yep.
And things like lighting rigs that have been built up around what has been the film industry for so long. How do we bridge that gap? Or is it just a bunch of hacks along the way that we'll eventually figure out,
Yes. Yes.
the crews will all of a sudden be VR crews instead of just traditional?
Exactly. I think that, well, on the beach scene there, it's all practical lighting. And so, yeah, you can't have a lot of lighting rigs around.
Right.
It forces, when you're doing VR, you have to just totally rethink your set. You have to rethink everything. Maybe you have to rethink your story, you have to rethink how you direct actors, and you have to rethink how you light. Right now, the camera systems are complete hacks. We know that the Lytros and the Reds are all, and Samsung, Google, and Facebook all have camera systems coming out.
Mm-hmm.
But those are just capture systems, and they're going to do some really killer stuff in the cloud on stitching stuff. But the lighting and the education of crew were
Right.
nowhere.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's going to transform that as well.
Yeah. Have you started coming up with best practices? Seems like too small a word, but for narrative content, I know you talked a little bit about this, but is there, I don't know, ideas and points that you could say, like, this is how you think about VR?
I mean, it's too early for best practices. I mean, there's certainly some stuff like you don't want to make people dizzy, so you kind of don't want to move the camera in angles in
Sure.
a way that will just make people throw up immediately. So there's some of the don't do the dumb stuff.
Yeah.
But I think we're too early to have a conclusion of saying here's the best way to be creative in the space. So it's still really wide open. That's why it's so exciting. But there are things that you should not do. We think that shooting in stereo isn't always a necessity.
Mm-hmm.
We've actually found that it doubles the time of production. It doubles the time. It doubles the time of post-production. It increases production time, and the net result isn't really that impactful. So we found shooting in mono, which just means 4 cameras instead of 8 cameras. So we've found that, but it's too early for best practices. We just know that you really have to find a way to connect with the audience.
Mm-hmm.
And so we chose a lot of music. It's like you're kind of like your job's half done. If you have a great song and people are gonna like it, then you're like, okay, you just don't mess up the visuals.
Right.
So we kind of are leaning into music, but with the project that we did with The Whale, the practice there was how could you give the visitor in the simulation the feeling that they're standing on a boat and a 100-foot whale swims up to you
Mm-hmm.
in scale. And it turns out VR is really the only way of actually doing that without making the whale. It's actually kind of very accurate. So we went for the awe. So I think that to the creative that's thinking about this stuff is be very brave.
Mm-hmm.
Think about how you can really, really emotionally connect with the audience, and then just go for it.
Mm-hmm.
And then your style of VR will develop a best practice. But the industry doesn't have one, but there are some things to avoid, which is moving the camera wildly while you're in it.
A very tactical question, but I'm sure some people in the audience are curious. What is even ballpark budget or crew to make something of the caliber that you're making?
Yeah, so I mean, it's expensive when you're doing the 3D stuff. So the whale was very expensive. The piece that we did with Tyler Hurd, he's a one-man band, and so that was in the tens of thousands. It was
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't the hundreds of thousands. And the piece with Janitska Bravo, who's an independent filmmaker, we shot that in a day, but it took 3 months to put together. I think those are somewhere in the $100,000 range.
Mm-hmm.
So we're kind of looking at on the video side, on the 360 video side, a $2,000 minute kind of scaling up to an $8,000 minute.
Mm-hmm.
You get economies of scale if you kind of go past that. But the budgets are, and sometimes the budgets are cheap. If you're doing sort of news journalism, it could be really, just as expensive as a normal video shoot.
Mm-hmm. So you talked quite a bit about speed in your presentation and the speed that things are moving, and I'm curious both what makes you really excited about that and what makes you really nervous about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think being in something that's speedy gives you this like, adrenaline. It also gives you a lot of fear. I mean, I think that, I think the innovation of the technology is actually the speed there is frankly really, it demonstrates how technical a society we are today. To see the leaps and bounds, like, Facebook worked on a camera for about a year. You can upload your and same with YouTube. You can upload your files into the cloud, and it literally creates a derivative stereo image based on computer vision technology. That's remarkable in a year. So or a year and a half. So think 9 years out, what that's going to look like. It's going to be crazy. So that kind of speed makes me very happy. On the creative side, I don't think that the speed is really that helpful. So I like certain areas and I don't like other areas. I think that the general speed that we're all under as just a society to produce great work is on us all. I think on virtual reality, it's like a magnifying glass on it. It's heating it up, which generally makes me think the market isn't ready for that. So overall, I'd like a little more time for it to mature, maybe another 2 years or 3 years without a lot of people looking at it, expecting it to do something more than it can do right now.
Right. Is there anything that you found that you would say could influence the way people make more traditional things like websites or apps or whatever it is that would be the case?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the WebGL world is really powerful, and the folks over at Firefox really worked on something. God, I just forgot their name. I want to say they have a whole API kit that actually can give you VR in a website, and it's A-Frame. Who said that? Thanks. My brain just went dead. So A-Frame is really powerful. I think that really sort of says that like VR isn't just happen. In fact, I want to see VR happen on the web and go web scale, so that all you're doing is trading URLs. I think that we have some limited refresh that we still have to get right. But I think that speed and intensity will actually make A-Frame and the folks behind that really take that there. So to kind of answer your question, I think that being immersed actually is forcing, I think, some web folks, which I count myself a member of, to kind of think, wow, I have this website, I can do this, but if they click this button, it instantly goes into cardboard. And if they put it up, I can see something. I think that's a really profound thing. And I think that's going to affect entertainment, but also just practical applications like, hey, I'm booking a hotel for my family. I can just do this and I can see this place I'm going to go spend money on. I think that's really cool.
Right. Is on the practical side, where do you see VR going? Like, obviously, like real estate, hotels is another example. Are there areas that most people aren't thinking about that you have been, not to give away your trade secrets?
No. I think that VR is I think it's a wedge-based technology. So I think it was sort of like the internet. It affects everything at some point in time. I don't see a world where everyone's sticking their head in a headset all the time. I just think that there's going to be choice stuff to go see, and I think obviously travel and entertainment and gaming are real clear ones. I don't do anything with the military, but those guys have got all kinds of wacky things they want to do with it. I think medical is like a place that I had no idea but there's doctors like practicing surgeries using headsets. Like they get a 3D scan of a brain, and then they practice and practice and practice. I thought that's a wonderful use of the technology. We're working with Deepak Chopra on a bunch of guided meditation simulations. So I think that you can imagine putting yourself into a headset and him giving you a guided meditation, and the visuals are sort of like really mellow, and you can kind of just get like a relaxing moment out of it. It's like a forced meditation. So I think you'll see a lot of areas there. Another place, which I didn't have time to really talk about, which is this company that was bought by Google, was called Tiltbrush, which was an application in VR where you're able to make VR in VR by drawing in 3D. Which was just like totally mind-blowing. I saw that and I was just like, oh my God, this is so mind-blowingly cool. And now Oculus has one called Quill, and you can draw in space and it records your strokes, so you can kind of play them as a video, but be in it. So I think like those kinds of applications, which I can't even think of, that are just showing up, are really mind-blowing. And those are made by people that are like designers, that have the vision of designers. So I think those areas are really going to be exploding too.
Nice. Yeah, I was going to say, well, I'm bad at watching time. Let's have audience questions.
I wanted to ask about the evolution that you're seeing in narrative and how the traditional storytelling mechanisms are kind of broken now that you become the protagonist, and what have you seen in this kind of evolution of how we tell stories using this medium?
Yeah, I mean, I think with with Janitska's piece, she did the piece in the car. She really had to figure out how to. I mean, so when you put your head in the VR, you're sort of the director almost, and so she had to sort of script a couple vignettes going on to your left and to your upper right, and she didn't have to worry about behind you at all. But generally a director is directing every scene. It's like shot over the shoulder, rack focus, cut back, cut here, cut there. They're in control. When you in VR, the agency is almost all given to the visitor, and so you have to just think about that. The production design a lot more. So the story, the narratives have to change. I don't know if they're changed drastically right now because people are just getting underneath it. But Janitska is sort of like one of the use cases where she was an independent filmmaker and theater director, and she had to struggle through it. She was very brave and figured it out. When you watch it, I'd have to ask you to go watch it and see if you saw how she was playing with narrative structure. Because there's a couple different vignettes. You don't have to struggle through it. It's not like work. You can just watch it and go, that's great. Or the next time you watch it, you can see these subtle things that are happening in case you want to look around. And with Run the Jewel, we were just like, we just want to surround you in every quadrant. So if you did want to do a full body turn, you could see all kinds of different versions of that, of Killer Mike and Jamie, being an MC really up close. So, each case of storytelling is so unique that I don't have a perfect example of all, but each individual one has changed their narrative to fit the medium. And in fact, it is a total new medium, so we tell directors, like, please check all your directing skills at the door and all your storytelling skills at the door. Just come in with good taste and courage, and let's make something.
We have time for one more.
Hi. I first of all, every time I go into the blue, I want to poke the whale's eye. It's just a ton of fun. Everyone should be in the blue. So how do you feel about like photogrammetry and light field technology that's coming out? Because you're hacking away on these cameras, and the cost of being a VR production company, and they're like, oh, now we got to know photogrammetry, and now we got to know like light field and this kind of future tech that's happening. How do you keep up the pace of R&D while you're also trying to keep up the pace with what's happening at like that first gen level of VR filmmaking?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, so we've been at it for a couple of years now, and we're still using our same GoPros. We're aware that we've talked to Lightro. They've been in our office. We've kicked each other's tires. That's down the road. Of course, capturing light is going to be the way to get depth data so that we can do other stuff. And photogrammetry is really impressive. It's still not. That's even more bleeding edge than actually VR. We think that it's all going to come, and if it makes the story better, materially, then we're going to want to use it. If it doesn't materially change the story, then we're quite comfortable, and we're comfortable in telling other creative people, just go with what's actually working right now, because right now it's creating a story for immersive consumption or creation is actually a craft. And it's almost, you have to kind of think about let's just use the tech we have and let's get good at our craft. And as more tech comes, if it works for us, great. If it doesn't, move along. That's my answer to that.
Do we have one more question? I'm having one yes, one no.
Sounds like
There's a gentleman over here too that had his hand up for a while. No?
Two-part question, because this is really where it starts. Empowerment, innovation, and design thinking for social impact. And the second question is we have to be serious about privacy and security of information and radical transparency of data. When will we get serious on both those subjects?
Well, the latter question, I don't know. You mean the transparency and stuff? Well, we don't have a lot of people's information right now. Fair question. We don't have a lot of it right now. The first part, it's more of a statement about social impact. We're not doing a lot of stuff on social impact, to tell you the truth, but I think there's a guy from the UN, his name's Gabo, and he's got a movie out called Wings of My Mother, and he's embedded in a Palestinian home, and he's sort of with a mom that lost her sons, and it's deeply moving. It's like a lot of times you just hear about this stuff in the news, but he's actually down there shooting 360 video, and so when you put it on, you're actually kind of there. And the effect is pretty powerful when you watch it. So he's a creative. I don't know if he's using design thinking as much as he's trying to tell a story that actually connects people to some real problems in the world. I don't know if that answers your question.
I don't know if we have enough time for more questions. One more.
This is a question about the relationship in file size between VR content and conventional video content. If that market size described by Goldman Sachs is actually realized or something like that, what's going to be the impact on bandwidth and data storage?
Yeah, it's a great question. We struggle with it. The Reggie piece is 9 terabytes. It bakes down, and that's a real cost to a young company, like having all this, it's like, what do you do with all that data? You know what I mean? It bakes down to a 12-minute piece, and it's a little over 2 gigs. And which is bad news because the phones don't really like that. And so like if you go on, there's another company called Verse, you download, it's like 560 megs. So, you just do the math. It's like, it's probably, moving the needle for the Verizons of the world. And, those guys are like, great, bigger file sizes. But yeah, it's something we struggle with because it's a lot of data. It's, we're shooting 4 cameras, so it's 4 times the data as 1 camera, right? And so it's just a lot of data, and we're shooting at 4K, and now you're gonna move up to 6K with 6 cameras. Yeah, eventually we'll do stitching in the cloud. The thing about stitching in the cloud is it presumes that you do not want your hand on it. And in most cases, when you're editing narrative, you kind of want to have your hand on it a little bit more. So I think that some of that stitching in the cloud is maybe good for just passive creators, but very active creators are going to want to do some of their own magic. So we kind of want some of that stuff to come down to the desktop as well, so you're not doing it by hand, but you still want to edit scenes.
Okay, I think that's it. Yeah, that's it. Thank you, Anthony.